Hey there, movie fans. Welcome to a brand new episode of Consider This. I'm Scott Mantz, and if you've been watching the first few episodes, you know that 1999 is my all-time favorite year for movies. So many great films like The Matrix, Election, American Beauty, The Insider, Three Kings, Being John Malkovich, The Iron Giant, the list goes on and on. But one film that really had a huge impact on my career is Eyes Wide Shut, released on July 16th, 1999. It's the first movie I ever reviewed. This film was misunderstood when it came out in 1999, but of course, like most of Kubrick's films, it has gone on to become re-evaluated, reappreciated. Now people think of it as a Christmas movie. I had a great conversation with two film scholars who literally wrote the book, The Making of Eyes Wide Shut, and it is one of the best conversations I ever got to host about the making of a film. Hope you enjoy this conversation. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Scott Mantz, and please follow me on social media, Instagram, TikTok, X, and so on, at Movie Mantz. Enjoy, and remember, the password is Fidelio. And I'm so excited to be joined for this conversation by Nathan Abrams and Robert Kolker. They are the authors of Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick, and the making of his final film. If you're sitting here for this screening, this is a book you are going to want to read as fast as I did. Gentlemen, can't thank you enough for joining me. So first question I want to throw to Nathan and just be like, how has the perception of Eyes Wide Shut changed from the day it opened on July 16th, 1999 to here we are, the 25th anniversary?
Well, in the UK and the USA, it didn't get well received. And it got well received elsewhere in places like Japan and Southern Europe. But I think over the 25 years, people have come to regard it perhaps not as Kubrick's greatest film, but certainly as another classic Kubrick film.
How about you, Robert? What's your take on the increased appreciation, how time has been very good to Eyes Wide Shut?
Um, I think what happened is that it was not largely negative, but it was a commercial flop on its first appearance. And then there was an intervention on the part of serious critics, even scholarly critics, and that seemed to lift it up. And so within a year or two or three, it became much more not only admired, but understood. And popular critics began joining in, and it has emerged as one of Kubrick's most important films. And he thought it was. And as in so many of his films, the audience has begun to join in with that perception. In other words, many of Kubrick's films started off poorly received.
I would say, agree with you. I mean, Robert, I think after including 2001: A Space Odyssey in 1968 and every film after that, it went from mixed to beloved to being hailed as a masterpiece, including this one. And even Oscar-winning filmmaker Christopher Nolan hailed Eyes Wide Shut as the 2001: A Space Odyssey of relationship movies. And you're right. I mean, the movie opened on July 16th, 1999 with $21.7 million. It was Stanley Kubrick's only movie to open in the #1 spot, but it only made about $56 million domestic, $162 million worldwide. But, you know, going back to you, Nathan, it took 12 years between Full Metal Jacket to Eyes Wide Shut in terms of the release dates. But where was Stanley Kubrick in his life in the 90s, and how did that inform his approach to what he was going to do with Tram Novelle, the novella that became Eyes Wide Shut?
He was
After Full
Oh, go ahead, Nathan.
after Full Metal Jacket, he was working on three movies. Novella, which became Eyes Wide Shut, was one of them. There was Super Toys Last All Summer Long, which became AI, and Aryan Papers, his abandoned Holocaust movie. And he's flitting between the three as each stymies him in different ways. When he realizes that he can't do either AI or Aryan papers. There's various reasons for that. He then focuses his attention on Eyes Wide Shut by the mid-90s, 94, 95. And I think there's a sense that time was running out, that he felt that time was running out, and he wanted to work on the movie that he'd been dreaming of making ever since he became a feature filmmaker back in the 50s.
All right, Robert, your take on that.
Just to point out that that decade, he was working really hard. He had 3 films or 2 films in development, AI and Aryan Papers. And Aryan Papers got very, very close to production. And he was ultimately so depressed by the subject matter that he let it go. AI, he had trouble getting a script that he really loved. And so, as Nathan pointed out, he turned to this project that had been on his mind for 50 years.
50 years. That's right. I mean, he actually, I believe, according to your book, he acquired the rights in, I believe, 1968. And the original setting for Traum Nouvelle, which was written by Arthur Schnitzler, was Vienna at the turn of the century, the 19th century into the 20th century. So, Robert, what was behind Kubrick's decision to change the setting from Vienna in the early turn of the century to New York City in the later turn of the century?
I think he just felt it important to give it a contemporary setting. And there is a lot of non-Kubrickian nostalgia in the setting of Eyes Wide Shut. In other words, he was by this point homesick for New York, and he really wanted to make New York, particularly the New York that he knew when he left it in the late 1960s. And he had thought of other locations, but New York was prominent. And so he rebuilt a kind of dream New York, a lost dream New York, a New York that only existed in his imagination.
I'm going to get to that in a moment because there's been so much that's been written and been said about the, quote unquote, New York of Eyes Wide Shut versus the real New York. But before I get to that, because Kubrick had envisioned Eyes Wide Shut or at least the source material for so many years, I've read so many different casting choices with the likes of Steve Martin, Woody Allen, Alan Alda, Bill Murray. Nathan, how close did any one of these other actors actually get to doing Eyes Wide Shut before it became, Tom Cruise?
Well, I don't think any of them got really close because he didn't get close to finding a script that he liked. Something Bob said about AI is probably more appropriate for Eyes Wide Shut, up to the point that he got Frederick Raphael on the board. He wasn't happy with the script as it was developing. He went through numerous iterations. He got different writers on board. So I think these were just names pulled out of a hat, and I don't think any of them were serious contenders until the mid-90s, until he settled on Frederick Raphael as the screenwriter, and he was happy with the progress they were making. And I think, in a sense, I mean, you probably want to talk about this in a bit, but the casting was perfect, a husband and wife team. And not only that, but think of Tom Cruise, where Tom Cruise was at in his career in the mid-90s, and the way Kubrick used him in the movie. So I think, the script wasn't up to speed, and he only came across the right actor probably around the time the script was up to speed for him, or the other way around.
Yeah, Robert, in terms of cracking the script with Frederick Raphael, I mean, here you have a story that is certainly not nearly as demanding as, say, Barry Lyndon or even, Dr. Strangelove or 2001: A Space Odyssey. So what was it about his collaboration with Frederick Raphael that helped him actually crack the script in a way that he felt like he was ready to move forward and cast it and film it?
Well, the relationship, as with so many of his writers was fraught. He kept pushing on Raphael. Raphael kept pushing back somewhat weakly. And Kubrick eventually took it over and didn't so much rewrite as fashion the script that he wanted for the film. Raphael, of course, was displeased and went on to write a rather dyspeptic memoir of working with Kubrick, and sort of spread all of the unpleasantness, and that has lingered until other people got to work and corrected who Kubrick was and what his working methods were, and dispelled or tried to dispel Raphael's notions and recall of working with Kubrick.
Yeah, Nathan, you brought up Tom Cruise, and one of the discoveries from reading your book was how early into that process Tom Cruise sort of started to get involved with conversations at the suggestion of none other than Tom Cruise's director for the firm, Sidney Pollack, who wound up being in the film itself, thanks to Harvey Keitel walking off the set. We'll get to that in a minute as well. So Tom Cruise seems like I mean, I love Tom Cruise. I think he's a great actor. I think he's done a lot of excellent work. He's a 3-time Oscar nominee. One of those nominations came the same year that Eyes Wide Shut was released. You know, that was a Magnolia for supporting actor. But what made Stanley Kubrick go? I think I found my Bill and Alice Harford.
Well, like you said, he came on good recommendations. He was married. He was impressed with Nicole Kidman's performance. Kubrick was impressed with Nicole Kidman's performance. And the movie's just gone out of my head. The name of which has gone out of my head. So he had he had a married couple, which I think adds to the intrigue of the film, of the blurring between on-screen persona and behind-screen persona of Nicole Kidman, Tom Cruise. And you think of where Tom Cruise is kind of traded on two images: that actor who's always, that character who's always a bit unsure of himself sexually. You know, think Interview of a Vampire, but then rapidly morphing into kind of Hollywood's leading action hero with Mission Impossible. So I think the film very cleverly plays on off-screen, on-screen images of Tom Cruise. And this is you know, there's a line in the movie where he removes a speck of dust, or helps remove some dust from a model's eye, and he responds, "Well, that's the kind of hero I can be."
Yeah.
And it's like such a great play on the Tom Cruise that people had come to expect, and he really plays against type in this movie. I think he really carries it. You know, the comparisons would be to Ryan O'Neal and Barry Lyndon, two actors who've been slated for their roles, but I think played them both perfectly.
I agree with that. What's your take on Tom Cruise's performance and going against type and being in every scene of the movie, Robert?
Well, first of all, you can't discard Kubrick's commercial sense. I mean, these were top, certainly Cruz, top figures in the 90s, and the opportunity to use them and to foreground the star quality of his film can't be forgotten. I think that the performance is strange. He is figuratively and literally sleepwalking through the performance, through the film, because it's a dream, because it's a dream film, and because he's being pushed from frame to frame to play against type. You can detect the tension between the Cruz that everybody knows and loves and Tom Harford that everybody has to know, if not love, in the course of the film.
Well, Bill Harford, especially, you know, I remember when I reviewed the movie, I do want to point out that I mentioned that it's kind of film that commercial moviegoers might not like, but Kubrick fans will find a lot to admire and appreciate over time, which is exactly what happened. But I found that the character to be effectively passive, and reacting more than taking any kind of proactive role that, well, as we mentioned, Nick Cruz is best known for up to that point, and certainly with all the Mission Impossible since. Um, but this was a film that was supposed to last in shooting for about 6 weeks, 6 months, and it went on for, I believe, 400 days, which is consecutively a Guinness Book of World's Record for the longest shoot ever. So again, I bring up the question for you, Nathan, is that this is a film that when you compare it to the groundbreaking visual effects pioneering work on 2001, or the scope of Barry Lyndon, or the two parts of Full Metal Jacket, this is a film that just doesn't seem like it would be so demanding to last that long. What happened that it kept going and going to the point where Harvey Keitel, as Ziegler, just like had enough and walked off?
The story's not quite as simple as that, but yeah, there were retakes and reshoots, and Harvey Keitel was brought in. Kubrick didn't like how it looked, so he wanted the set rebuilt. Harvey Keitel's contract was due to run out, and they didn't renew it because it would have prevented him from doing other projects. There were issues with Jennifer Jason Leigh. There was other actors brought in who weren't quite right. So Kubrick wanted to get everything correct. I think I get a sense he thought this was his last movie and he wanted to get everything right. Also, he's slowing up. I mean, bear in mind, Kubrick's approaching 70 years old by the time the movie wraps. He's in ill health. He's got a heart condition. He's smokes periodically. He eats terribly through his life. My theory is there's loads of chemicals on the sets of his movies that hasten his decline. And I think one of the killers, in a sense, was that he had to operate the camera himself towards the end of the movie, which he hadn't had to do for quite a while. So I think there's a meticulousness, which we also know Kubrick is a perfectionist and very meticulous. I think there was a sense this was going to be his final movie. That's my feeling. I can't prove that. And he did describe this as my greatest movie ever. So I think he wanted to get it all right. Plus he's slowing up. So I think you add that all into the mix. Yes, it takes a long time. I mean, Kubrick was never a quick film director. If you think he took a year or two for his early projects, his films, 2001 took 4 years. So that wasn't quick either.
Right, that's a good point. That's a really good point. And we touched in a bit about the dream like state of the film. I mean, but first of all, so Tram Nouvelle is it the adaptation for that story is Dream Story. So it's right there in the title. So it always kind of baffled my mind that people just didn't really like see it right there. That it's a dream. And even like the last scene where Alice says to Bill, like the important thing is that we're awake now, before she says that classic final word. But we did talk about the set, the New York set. So Robert, like the way that set looks, I noticed this when I just rewatched the film prior to this conversation. So there's a mailbox that you see in the film with graffiti on it. The mailbox keeps shifting its location to different parts of the set. And, surely someone of Kubrick's caliber with his attention to detail, must have kind of maybe figured out that, people are going to pick up on that. Certainly it took me a while, but I did. But Robert, if you could just like talk about the Kubrick's New York, the dream state of New York, and why that actually benefited the movie.
Well, because it's a construct, the set or sets, there was some location shooting in London, but most of it was done at the studio. And I've never noticed the fire hydrant moving, but if it does,
mailbox,
fine. It's a dream, and in dreams, odd things happen. Also, it's a set that had to be used for different places at different points in the script. So parts of it were moved around. What is no accident is the graffiti. There's graffiti all over the place, and much of it refers to things in Kubrick's life. So there's shout out to his assistant, Leon Vitali. There are references to other films. There's the famous Knishery, the Knishery.
Yep.
Comes all the way back to Kubrick's parents and where they lived and his Jewish background. So I take the set as is, as a kind of dreamscape. And if odd things happen in it, that's what happens in dreams, odd things.
Odd things for sure. Nathan, because Kubrick's movies, certainly the best of them, I think, are open to interpretation. I'm wondering if you share Robert's, feeling about the dream state of the New York set, or if you have a different way to see it.
No, I do agree. It's a dreamscape. The clues in the title of film Eyes Wide Shut. And also there's practical reasons for what Bob said. But one thing I do want to add to that is I won't repeat how the guy put it, but we spoke to one of the continuity guys Kubrick worked with, and he put it much more rudely, but I won't say it. He said Kubrick didn't care for continuity. So, Bill might be wearing his ring, he might not be wearing his ring. It wasn't something that really bothered him. And we see this most prominently, say, in The Shining, where a whole host of conspiracy theories then erupt around the fact that chairs disappear and reappear. And I get the sense that Kubrick was guided by everything that he saw on the monitor. If it didn't look right on the monitor, he discarded it and redid it, even if it was his idea in the first place. And I think he probably, this is the pre-DVD kind of era of well, I mean, maybe DVDs might have been there, but I think Kubrick missed the idea that people would be obsessively stopping, rewinding, reviewing, and noticing these things. To be fair, I hadn't noticed it until you said it. I knew that this stuff was graffitied, but I didn't realize it had moved around. And I think he didn't care that people would notice this. He has this great line, and I can't remember which movie, he said it on, when someone questioned him about a decision, he said, "Well, let the French critics tell us what that means."
Oh, yeah.
I would point out something else, that there's a conscious reference in those sets to the way movie sets looked in the 40s. In fact, I believe we have a still in the book from a 1940s film that looks almost identical to the street in Eyes Wide Shut.
Yep.
So there's a sense of film history, not only personal history, but the history of film going on in Eyes Wide Shut.
Can I add one quick thing? It's very quick.
Yeah.
I rewatched all of Seinfeld recently, an episode a day, and to me, there was some of the Seinfeld sets, which obviously weren't built in New York, they were in LA. There was a shot, I said to Bob, I think this looks just like Seinfeld, deliberate or otherwise, and we know Kubrick liked it and was watching it. So all this stuff is sort of filtering into his imagination, and whether intentional or otherwise, it comes back out, like this Knishery, which is actually out of place because the Knishery is in the Lower East Side, and he stuck it in the Village. But he didn't care for that geographical accuracy, just like he didn't care with the mailbox. It looked right to him on camera, so he wanted to keep it there. As to why it was there, we'll never know.
Well, you know what else looked great on camera, especially when you watch Eyes Wide Shut on the big screen, is the cinematography. Well, Larry Smith, who was not the most experienced cinematographer by the time he did Eyes Wide Shut. But listen, I think the movie looks great in Blu-ray. I mean, I've watched it many times at home, but nothing compares to watching it on the big screen where you just see the glow around the lights. At Ziegler's party, it is like incredible how they were able to use the natural lighting. When Bill goes to see Nick Nightingale at the Sonata Club and all the Christmas lights, the glow around them. Like Robert, if you could talk about the cinematography, about how the push processing of the lighting and the emulsion adds to the dream story.
Well, Kubrick was a technophile. He loved rethinking ways of putting things on film. And in this instance, he was looking for a particular visual quality that was, in a way, hyperreal, surreal in spots. And by pushing the film, by overexposing, he achieved that kind of glow that you speak about, and the general sense of something that you see, but you're not quite sure of what you're seeing.
Well, so filming, begins, and the first thing they shot was the scene at Ziegler's party when Keitel was still involved. But one of the centerpieces of the film is Alice's revelation after Bill and Alice get stoned. So Nathan, like, how did filming that scene progress? How many sort of takes did Nicole Kidman have to do until Kubrick felt like they got the take?
Yeah, to be honest, I can't recall the exact number it took for that one. I'd have to consult the daily production reports. There is one thing I want to add, a little revelation I had now that you mentioned that scene. We do know Kubrick was influenced by James Cameron, right? We know he took 2 lines from True Lies. If you think of True Lies, the oxymoron inherent in the title, True Lies, and Eyes Wide Shut, again, another oxymoron. And Kubrick watched True Lies and he spoke to Cameron. I was watching Terminator 2 recently, another James Cameron movie.
Yeah.
And there's a bit where Sarah Connor is telling her son off. And to me, the performance is so similar to Nicole Kidman's in that sequence you mentioned. So I haven't answered your question, but this is a brand new revelation for your audience that it makes sense that Kubrick admired Cameron, he spoke to him, and the way that trying to think of the actor for Sarah Connor in Terminator 2 is very similar to Nicole's performance in Eyes Wide Shut in that sequence in particular.
Very interesting. But how about you, Robert? Like, what kind of, in researching your book, what were some of the revelations you found about the filming of Alice's revelation? Was there anything that surprised even you with all the research that you did?
Nothing surprising. The fact that he pushed and pushed and pushed in order for her in that sequence to give a performance that is, in a sense, so obviously acting, that it seems clear that he worked to wring out any kind of spontaneity and to make it as strained and as hypnotic and as accusatory as well. I mean, because that scene is what triggers
Oh,
Dr. Bill to go on his quest.
yep.
Can I add something to that? One of the reasons for the multiple takes, other than characters not getting their lines right or technical glitches, Kubrick said, I think he said it to Jack Nicholson, real is good, interesting is better. So one of the reasons for the multiple takes is a slight disagreement with Bob here, is that he wants something to come out that is beyond acting. They may be so sick of doing the scene, they're tired, that he then spots something that hadn't been rehearsed, that wasn't acting, that wasn't so naturalistic. And I think he ground his actors down, and we know most famously with Shelley Duvall, to get the performance he required of them. And sometimes it happened quickly, we know, and other times it took multiple takes. Scatman Carruthers in The Shining, whereas very pleased with Matthew Modine and Vincent D'Onofrio in one take in Full Metal Jacket. So it really depended. And I think if he got that interesting straight away, then that was the take. But often he didn't get the interesting because he needs an actor to learn their lines. And movie actors, this is one of the reasons Kubrick had a problem with movie actors. They didn't always know the lines as they were scripted, right? That was the first rule. After that, you could improvise and you could change it, but you always had to obey the first rule, Kubrick's first rule of filmmaking. And that's why he had a taste for British actors, because most of them were classically trained and knew their lines.
Robert, what was behind the decision by Warner Brothers to do the digital overlays during the orgy scene? Because, watching the uncensored version of Eyes Wide Shut does not seem like a big deal at all. But it was in 1999.
Craven fear that it would get an X rating
Wow.
and therefore cut down on advertising and ticket sales. It was absolute a loss of nerve.
No,
Can I just add, this didn't happen in Europe, right? This was in a US thing only. I've only seen that sequence digitally edited that way once. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So this is a particularly United States thing for that rating, and I think they knew it was a mistake. What they said he would have done had he been alive is re-edited the sequence so it's more point of view shots on Bill. More reaction shots on Bill rather than point of view shots. But there's fear in the US, not fear elsewhere.
One of the things about the movie is how much duality there is. For example, when Ziegler summons Bill to tend to the girl in his bathroom, and he brings her back and he says, "You're a very lucky girl." And then later in the film, he's reading a newspaper that says "Lucky to be alive" as the headline. Also at the party, the two girls tell Bill, "We're taking you over the rainbow." And then he goes to the costume shop, which is Rainbow Fashions. That, I'm assuming, was deliberate, Robert, right?
Oh, absolutely. Kubrick loved doubles. He was very taken with Freud's notion of the uncanny and seeing things twice. And you see doubles all the way through. I mean, as early as Fear and Desire, his first film, in which the enemy soldiers are played by the same actors as the heroic soldiers, or the cowardly soldiers, however you want to read them. And so in Eyes Wide Shut, you get this sense, not only in the doubling of things like the headline in the newspaper, but you also get the repetitions in the dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
Everything that is said by one person is echoed with a question or put in the form of a question by the other person in the scene. So again, it's this kind of dream world in which things happen and everybody sort of needs reassurance that what they've heard. It's like an echo chamber of the mind.
Well, the movie, so in the beginning of March of 1999, Stanley Kubrick screens Eyes Wide Shut for Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, Bob Daly, and Terry Semel from Warner Brothers. And then on March 7th, 1999, Stanley Kubrick passes away. So that has raised a question for the last 25 years, one that you both have a very interesting take in the book. So, like, the people have been asking, was this Kubrick's final cut, or was it just the director's cut? He had famously worked on other films up to the premieres and even after the premieres. Would he kept tinkering around with Eyes Wide Shut up until its release on July 16th? But then I got to a passage in your book where we say, you know what, that's irrelevant. So who wants to take that away? Nathan, Robert, who wants to go first on that?
It's the cut we have.
That's your cut, right? That's the cut we got.
I think
go ahead.
Sorry, I think what's really interesting is it's not so much whether it's the cut, whether it was or wasn't. The way we have to look at it is it's really only Kubrick. I mean, I can't think of many other directors that attract this level of obsessive interest for people to even worry about whether that was the cut or not. I mean, I suppose maybe Blade Runner, we have that, but not. I don't think people are as invested in Ridley Scott in the same way as they are with Kubrick. So it's the very fact that there are people out there just not happy with the idea that this wasn't the finished Kubrick movie and that he would have tinkered with it. And I think there's two reasons for that. One, it's Kubrick, right? He attracts that level of obsessive attention, that devotion, that cultish following, that Talmudic scrutiny. The other thing was, I think people were disappointed. You wait 12 years for anything, you'll be disappointed by it, right? No matter how good it is. And I think they were initially disappointed, baffled, so they had to look for a reason for it, right? And the reason would be, well, it wasn't the movie. The movie wasn't finished in the way Kubrick wanted it to be. So I think you have to look at the motivation as to why people say there's not. But I do agree with Bob. It's the movie we have.
Yeah. One thing that I noticed right away when I saw it the first time, it's something that I've really honed in on every time I've seen it over these last 25 years, is that, you know, Bill goes off into the night to have his odyssey, if you will, to borrow from another Kubrick movie. And every single time he gets to the point of crossing the line and being unfaithful to Alice, something happens to interrupt him. When he's at Marion's and, you know, Carl comes home, when he's with Domino and the phone rings, and of course, when he gets outed at the orgy, like, and that's why over the years, as more people started to hone in on Eyes Wide Shut being a Christmas movie, which I didn't see as a Christmas movie, but now I do, I started to sort of see Eyes Wide Shut this way. If Stanley Kubrick directed It's a Wonderful Life, the result would be Eyes Wide Shut. So, Robert, am I out of my mind here? Or is that because that's something you also pointed out, is that the shadow, there's a little bit of a shadow of It's a Wonderful Life over this movie.
Could be. I never quite thought about it. It's always interesting to have a Christmas background in a movie because it plays the presumed or desired merriment of the season is played against the torment of the characters. So it's a kind of counterpoint, and it's not unique to Eyes Wide Shut. But I would say that to consider Eyes Wide Shut a Christmas movie, then Stanley Kubrick is Santa Claus.
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Can I add?
Okay.
Yeah, can I add to that? I mean,
Yeah.
so the original novel's set at carnival time in Vienna, and so there isn't really an equivalent unless you set it during Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And if I remember rightly, the firm set in New Orleans, which would have been a bit too uncanny. What you mentioned earlier,
Memphis,
Tom
yeah.
Cruise. So if you switch it to New York, the only other kind of, well, Halloween could have been an interesting one. Thinking about it, but I think there was another reason, and you alluded to it earlier. There are Christmas lights and Christmas trees in every sequence. I think maybe with the exception of the orgy sequence.
Yeah, that's right.
And that enabled him to put practicals in every sequence. Lights that should appear there to help light up every scene, so that gives that glow. If you think of that curtain of lights at Ziegler's townhouse at the party, not only does that light up the scene and give it that gorgeous glow that you referred to earlier, it also has those references back to Klimt, Gustav Klimt, the artist painting at the time that Schnitzler's writing. There's lots of allusions to the Vienna from which the novel came, and so I think those two reasons why Kubrick did Christmas.
All right. So last question, while you were researching and writing the book, was there any revelation that blew your mind about Eyes Wide Shut? Like a takeaway for you that I just never in a million years would have guessed that or assumed that. Robert, you go first.
Oh, Kubrick's ordering a catalog of women's lingerie from a Long Island firm.
How about you, Nathan?
Oh, I'm going to do 3 quick ones. That Cate Blanchett's voice is the voice of the woman who saves Bill at the orgy, that she was brought in to dub the voice. Number 2, so I live in North Wales. In Wales, there's a called the Eisteddfod, where the attendees wear robes and druidical robes, and Kubrick researched those. He had a catalogue for those. Amongst the research materials. I always like to find connections to where I live. But for me, we'd long suspected that Ziegler was Jewish, right? That he was played by Sidney Pollack and the whole character. It was finding, as I was searching for the notes to confirm it was Cate Blanchett's voice, amongst those notes was Leon Vitali had left a little note for the dubbing for the subtitlers and the dubbers. And he on that note, it said Ziegler, hedge fund manager, around 50, Jewish. And it was like, yes, we found the proof of something we've long suspected. It's a tiny victory, but we've spent hours in that archive. The archive is voluminous, so to find anything that confirms a theory is fantastic. But I can't say it happened too often.
Well, last question, just to make it quick here, Robert, what is the legacy of Eyes Wide Shut? What do you hope people get out of it now after 25 years?
Oh, I think it's for me, it's a legacy of some melancholy, that this was the last film.
Yeah.
It's also the legacy of how it grows on you, even thinking about it. I mean, I can listen to the Shostakovich Jazz Waltz and recall the film and the emotions that the film provokes. So the legacy is that of a grand master giving us his last masterpiece.
All right, Nathan, take us out.
Yeah, it's his end game. A chess grandmaster giving us his end game.
Yeah.
For me, just quickly, the moment that I always recall is from the moment Bill says Fidelio, and the hairs on the back of my neck raised, and the expressionistic sound through the orgy sequence long stay in the memory. I would say Kubrick wanted to make this, I've said it before, wanted to make this movie from the point he wanted to start making movies. And it's a summation of his career. It's a coda, an endgame, mix all my metaphors. And if you don't like this movie, or if you don't want to understand this movie, you don't like or don't want to understand Stanley Kubrick.
Agreed. Nathan and Robert, can I thank you enough for joining us for this conversation? For Eyes Wide Shut, for Landmark Theater's Retro Replay Series, 1999, the year that changed cinema. Thank you for everyone watching. Once again, the book, Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick and the making of his final film, is available now. You can get it on Amazon, just like I did. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone watching. And remember, Fidelio.